the Christmas Lantern Parade Electrocution. Welcome back to Mindful Musings, where mysteries unfold like winter frost on window panes. I'm your host, William, and today I'm sharing a tale that chilled St. Mary Mead to its very core, a Christmas story where festive lights became harbingers of death. Settle in as we follow Miss Marple through one of her most electrifying cases. Let's begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The River of Light. Miss Marple adjusted her woolen scarf against the December chill, watching as volunteers bustled about the village square preparing for St. Mary Mead's annual Christmas Lantern Parade. The event, scheduled for December 22nd at dusk, had become a beloved tradition over the past decade, transforming the village streets into a moving river of light as participants carried illuminated paper lanterns on poles through the winding lanes. "Safety first this year," announced Thomas Reed, the parade organizer, his voice carrying across the square. Reed, a man in his 60s with tired eyes that betrayed recent hardships, gestured toward rows of paper globe lanterns. "We've invested in 200 matching LED units. No more candle flames to worry about." Miss Marple observed the preparation with her characteristic attention to detail. Each lantern consisted of a delicate paper globe housing a battery-powered LED light, mounted atop a slender metal pole. The modern adaptation of the old tradition seemed sensible, though she noticed several villagers lamenting the loss of authentic candlelight. Among the early arrivals was Marcus Webb, whose presence caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Webb, a wealthy businessman whose success had come at considerable cost to others, strode through the staging area with his usual air of superiority. Miss Marple watched as he approached the lantern racks, his movements purposeful rather than casual. "Number 47, Webb declared to Dorothy Mills, who was coordinating electrical systems. "Where's number 47? Mills, a woman whose prison-pale complexion hadn't fully recovered its colour despite her release 6 months ago, gestured vaguely toward the racks. "They're all identical, Mr. Webb. Simply take anyone." "Nonsense," Webb insisted, his voice sharp. 47 is my lucky number. I made my first million at 47. Find it." Miss Marple noted this exchange with interest, filing away Webb's superstitious nature as she selected her own lantern, number 12, chosen at random from the nearest rack. Around her, other participants gathered their lanterns. Harold Price, the safety inspector whose weathered face showed years of worry. Sarah Fletcher, the parade marshal whose father's tragedy was known throughout the village. And Catherine Hayes, the photographer whose broken engagement to Webb's son remained a source of village gossip. The staging area hummed with activity as the 5 volunteers with access to the setup, Reed, Mills, Price, Fletcher and Hayes, made final preparations. Miss Marple observed how each moved through the space with practiced efficiency, their roles clearly defined yet overlapping in ways that made tracking individual actions challenging. As dusk approached, 200 participants assembled in formation, their lanterns creating pools of soft white light against the darkening sky. Webb had successfully located Lantern 47, clutching the pole with both hands as he took his position in the procession line. The sight of him holding his lucky number with such satisfaction struck Miss Marple as oddly portentous. The parade began its journey through St. Mary Mead streets, lanterns bobbing gently with each step, creating the intended effect of a luminous river flowing through the village. Spectators lined the route, children pointing excitedly at the passing lights, while adults appreciated the serene beauty of the modern tradition. Miss Marple walked with measured steps, her lantern steady in her grip, when suddenly a commotion erupted ahead. Webb's body convulsed violently, his lantern falling as he collapsed to the ground. The river of light fractured as participants rushed toward the fallen man, their careful formation dissolving into chaos. Dr. Haydock pushed through the crowd, but his examination was brief. Marcus Webb was dead, his body showing the telltale signs of severe electrical shock, though how such a thing could happen with a battery-powered LED lantern would become the central mystery of St. Mary Mead's darkest Christmas season. Chapter 2. The Lethal Circuit. Inspector Slack arrived within the hour, his perpetual scowl deepening as he surveyed the scene. The parade had been halted, participants standing in confused clusters, still holding their now-dimmed lanterns, while uniformed officers cordoned off the area where Webb had fallen. Electrocution, Dr. Haydock confirmed, removing his glasses to clean them, a nervous habit Miss Marple had observed over many years. High-voltage current passed through his body. The burns on his hands where he gripped the pole are unmistakable. Slack examined Webb's fallen lantern, number 47 lying innocuously on the cobblestones. At first glance, it appeared identical to the others, but closer inspection by the technical team revealed the horrifying modification. The metal pole had been transformed into a weapon. "Someone hollowed out this pole," the police technician explained, pointing to subtle tool marks. They installed a sophisticated electrical system, battery pack, voltage multiplier circuit, designed to deliver approximately 1,000 volts when gripped with both hands. Miss Marple stood nearby, her keen eyes taking in every detail. The modification was ingenious in its concealment. From the outside, Lantern 47 looked exactly like the other 199. Only someone with considerable electrical expertise could have created such a device. The circuit required both hands to complete, the technician continued. One hand alone wouldn't activate it. The victim had to grip the pole firmly with both hands, creating a path through their body to ground. Inspector Slack turned to Thomas Reed, who looked genuinely shaken. "You organised this parade, Mr. Reed. Who had access to these lanterns?" Reed's voice trembled as he replied. 5 of us handled setup. Myself, Dorothy Mills on electrical coordination, Harold Price for safety inspection, Sarah Fletcher as parade marshal, and Catherine Hayes documenting the preparation. Each name carried weight in the village's collective memory. Reed's electrical supply company had been destroyed by Webb's predatory tactics. Mills had served prison time for fraud Webb had orchestrated. Price had been fired by Webb after 25 years of service. Fletcher's father had taken his own life after Webb's testimony ruined him. Hayes had lost her engagement when Webb convinced his son she was after money. "Quite a collection of people with grudges," Slack observed without subtlety. "Any one of them could have modified this lantern." Miss Marple interjected gently. "But, Inspector, creating such a device requires specific knowledge. Not everyone could wire a voltage multiplier circuit or calculate the exact current needed for lethality." The investigation team began examining the staging area, looking for evidence of where and when the modification occurred. The lantern racks showed no signs of tampering, suggesting the deadly alteration had been made elsewhere, and the weapon carefully placed among innocent decorations. "Webb specifically requested number 47, Miss Marple mentioned. He searched through the racks until he found it, claiming it was his lucky number." Slack's expression darkened. "So, the killer knew Webb would choose that specific lantern. That suggests intimate knowledge of his habits." The inspector began questioning witnesses, starting with Dorothy Mills. Her account was precise, perhaps too precise, detailing her movements during setup with the clarity of someone who had rehearsed their story. She admitted knowing about Webb's obsession with 47. Everyone who'd done business with him knew, but denied any involvement in the modification. Harold Price appeared nervous under questioning, his safety inspector credentials making him a natural suspect. "I checked random lanterns," he insisted. "Standard procedure, but checking all 200 would have taken hours we didn't have." Sarah Fletcher maintained rigid composure, her grief over her father's suicide barely concealed beneath professional demeanour. Catherine Hayes spoke bitterly about her broken engagement, but claimed she'd been photographing the setup, providing time-stamped images as evidence. As night fell over St. Mary Mead, Inspector Slack faced 5 suspects with powerful motives and opportunity. But Miss Marple, walking home past houses where Christmas lights twinkled innocently, pondered the deeper question: who among them possessed both the electrical expertise and the cold calculation to turn a festive tradition into an execution device? Chapter 3. The Number 47. Miss Marple sat in her parlour the next morning, her nephew Raymond's newspaper clippings spread before her. She had requested information about Marcus Webb's business dealings, and Raymond, ever dutiful, had provided a comprehensive collection spanning 3 decades. "Hostile takeover of Meridian Electronics 1995, she read aloud to herself. Chief competitor Thomas Reed forced into bankruptcy, assets acquired for fraction of value. Another clipping detailed Webb's partnership with Dorothy Mills. Fraud scheme leaves partner facing prison, while Webb walks free, The article described how Webb had structured their business dealings to ensure Mills bore all legal liability while he retained the profits. The doorbell interrupted her research. Inspector Slack stood at her door looking frustrated. "Miss Marple, I need your perspective. We've searched all 5 suspects' homes with warrants. Found nothing conclusive." "Nothing at all, Inspector?" Miss Marple inquired, offering him tea. "Mills has electrical equipment, testing devices, circuit materials, but she claims it's for legitimate work. She's been taking correspondence courses in electrical systems since prison." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened with interest. "Electrical engineering courses? How thorough of her." "She says it was occupational therapy during incarceration," Slack continued. "Keep her mind active. The prison confirms she completed advanced courses in circuit design and high-voltage systems." This revelation settled into Miss Marple's mind like a puzzle piece finding its place. "And the number 47, Inspector? Have you investigated why Webb was so attached to it?" Slack nodded. "His lucky number, apparently. Made his first million at age 47. Since then, he's insisted on that number for everything. Hotel rooms, table reservations, even his parking space at the office." "How widely known was this preference?" Miss Marple asked. "Very. He made no secret of it. Boasted about it at business meetings, social gatherings. Anyone who'd spent time around Webb knew about his superstition." Miss Marple poured tea thoughtfully. "Then our killer counted on that predictability. They knew Webb would search for that specific lantern, would insist on carrying it himself." "But how did they mark it?" Slack wondered. "The lanterns all looked identical." "Did they?" Miss Marple asked mildly. "Perhaps we should examine the remaining lanterns more carefully." That afternoon, Miss Marple accompanied Inspector Slack to the police station, where the remaining 199 lanterns were stored. They examined each one methodically, looking for any distinguishing marks. It was Miss Marple who spotted it. A tiny notch on the base of pole 47's mounting bracket, barely visible unless one knew to look for it. "Someone marked this pole," she said. "Subtle enough to escape casual notice, but distinctive enough for someone searching to find it." "So the killer prepared the modified pole, marked it, and trusted Webb to select it himself," Slack summarized. "That's remarkably confident." "Or remarkably well-informed about his nature," Miss Marple corrected. "This killer understood Webb's psychology perfectly." They interviewed Webb's former employees and business associates. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of a man whose superstitions were as predictable as his cruelty. Everyone knew about 47. Everyone knew Webb would demand that number, would make a scene if denied it. Catherine Hayes provided photographs from the setup, and Miss Marple studied them carefully. In one image, Dorothy Mills could be seen near the lantern racks, her hand resting on a pole that might have been number 47. In another, Harold Price was inspecting lanterns, his expression concentrated. "Miss Hayes," Miss Marple asked, "did you notice anything unusual during your photography?" Hayes hesitated. Mills spent considerable time organizing the racks. She said she wanted them arranged numerically for easy distribution, but it seemed excessive for identical lanterns. This detail resonated with Miss Marple's growing theory. Organizing numerically would ensure pole 47's location was known, making it easier for Webb to find when he inevitably searched for it. As evening approached, Miss Marple felt the solution crystallizing. The killer had orchestrated every element: the electrical modification, the pole's placement, and Webb's selection. It was murder disguised as accident, planned by someone who understood both electrical engineering and human nature, someone whose revenge had been served cold after years of preparation. Chapter 4: Shadows of the Past. The next morning brought unexpected snow to St. Mary Mead, muffling the village in pristine white that seemed to mock the darkness of recent events. Miss Marple received a visit from Sarah Fletcher, the parade marshal whose composure had finally cracked. "I need to speak with you," Fletcher said, her usual rigid control abandoned. "About my father and Marcus Webb." Miss Marple led her to the sitting room, noting the young woman's trembling hands. "Take your time, dear." 20 years ago, Webb destroyed my father with false testimony in a lawsuit. Father had built his company honestly, but Webb manufactured evidence of financial irregularities. The court believed Webb, He was already successful, respected. Father lost everything. Fletcher's voice broke. He hanged himself in our garage. I found him when I came home from school. I was 12. Miss Marple offered a handkerchief, her expression sympathetic but alert. How terrible for you, my dear. I've spent 20 years watching Webb prosper while we struggled. Mother never recovered. She died 5 years ago, still believing Father. Was guilty because that's what the courts said. But I knew better. I found Father's journals after Mother died. He documented everything. Webb's bribes, the manufactured evidence, the conspiracy to destroy him. Did you ever confront Webb? Miss Marple asked gently. Once, last year. I showed him the journals, demanded he admit the truth. He laughed, said proving anything after 20 years was impossible, and even if I could, it wouldn't bring Father back. Miss Marple studied Fletcher carefully. You had access to the lanterns during setup. Yes, but I didn't kill him, Fletcher insisted. I wanted to, God knows I wanted to, but I don't know anything about electricity. I'm a parade marshal, not an engineer. After Fletcher left, Miss Marple visited Dorothy Mills' apartment. Mills answered the door wearing work clothes stained with solder flux, clearly interrupted during some technical project. Miss Marple, how unexpected, Mills said, her tone neutral. I wondered if we might discuss your electrical studies, Miss Marple said. Inspector Slack mentioned you've been taking courses. Mills's expression hardened slightly. Crime isn't a life sentence, Miss Marple. I served my time. The courses were my attempt to rebuild, to have skills Webb couldn't steal. She led Miss Marple to a small workshop in her spare bedroom. The space was meticulously organised. Components sorted in labelled drawers, testing equipment arranged on shelves, circuit diagrams pinned to a bulletin board. Impressive, Miss Marple observed, noting a partially assembled device on the workbench. What are you building? LED control system for next year's parade, Mills replied quickly. Reed asked me to design something that could synchronize all the lanterns, make them pulse in unison. Miss Marple examined the device without touching it. The circuitry seemed complex for simple LED control, but she kept this observation to herself. On the bulletin board, among legitimate diagrams, she noticed calculations for voltage multiplication and current flow through human tissue, quickly covered by Mills with other papers. You knew Webb well, Miss Marple ventured, from your business partnership. Mills's jaw tightened. I knew him well enough to know he deserved whatever happened to him, but knowing someone deserves punishment doesn't mean I delivered it. Yet you have the expertise, Miss Marple pointed out mildly. These courses you've taken, circuit design, high voltage systems, they would provide exactly the knowledge needed to modify that lantern. So would YouTube videos, Mills countered. We live in an age where anyone can learn anything online. Why focus on my legitimate education? Miss Marple didn't answer directly. Instead she asked, Did you know about Webb's attachment to the number 47 when you were business partners? Mills laughed bitterly. Everyone knew. He'd make us schedule meetings at 47 minutes past the hour. Invoice numbers had to include 47. He once rejected a £1 million deal because the contract was 46 pages long. As Miss Marple left Mills's apartment, she felt the weight of accumulated evidence. The electrical expertise, the deep knowledge of Webb's habits, the organisational role that provided perfect access to the lanterns. Everything pointed toward Dorothy Mills, yet something nagged at her, some detail that didn't quite fit the emerging pattern. Chapter 5. The Deadly Design. Inspector Slack called an emergency meeting at the police station. The evidence room had been transformed into an investigation centre, with photographs, diagrams, and witness statements covering every wall. At the centre table lay the modified lantern pole, now fully disassembled to reveal its lethal secret. The technical team has completed their analysis, Slack announced to the assembled group, which included Miss Marple and the 5 suspects who'd been asked to attend. This device is remarkably sophisticated. The police technician explained the modification in detail. The hollow pole contained a lithium battery pack stolen from industrial equipment, connected to a voltage multiplier circuit that could transform the battery's modest voltage into a lethal 1,000 volts. The trigger mechanism was ingenious. 2 contact points, one at the top of the pole where the right hand would naturally grip, another near the middle for the left hand. When both points were touched simultaneously, the circuit completed through the victim's body. The entire modification was concealed within the pole, the technician continued. The only external evidence was slightly increased weight, unnoticeable unless someone was specifically looking for it. Thomas Reed examined the components with professional interest. This isn't amateur work. The soldering is perfect, the components properly rated for the voltage. Whoever built this understood electrical engineering at a professional level. Which brings us to you, Miss Mills, Inspector Slack said, turning to Dorothy. You're the only one here with formal electrical training. Mills stood straighter, defiant. Having knowledge doesn't make me a killer, Inspector. By that logic, every electrician in England is a suspect. But every electrician didn't have their life destroyed by Marcus Webb, Slack countered. Harold Price interjected nervously. I inspected those lanterns. Random checks, but I inspected them. If I'd found this modification, Webb would still be alive. Does that make me negligent? You couldn't have found it without disassembling the pole, the technician assured him. The modification was invisible to external inspection. Catherine Hayes had been photographing the disassembled device, her camera clicking steadily. There's something else, she said suddenly. The battery pack. I've seen that model before. It's from a specific type of industrial equipment. What type? Slack demanded. Emergency lighting systems, the kind. Used in factories and warehouses. Webb's companies used them extensively. This revelation shifted attention. Access to Webb's industrial supplies suggested an inside connection. Someone who could obtain components without raising suspicion. Miss Marple spoke for the first time. Miss Mills, during your partnership with Webb, did you have access to his warehouses? Years ago, yes. But that access ended when I went to prison. But you knew the suppliers, Miss Marple continued. You knew which models Webb's companies used, where to obtain compatible components. Mills's composure cracked slightly. So did hundreds of employees and contractors. Sarah Fletcher watched the exchange with intense focus. You're suggesting Mills used her old knowledge to source the battery pack? I'm suggesting, Miss Marple said carefully, that our killer needed 3 things. Electrical expertise to build the device, knowledge of Webb's habits to ensure he'd select the modified lantern, and access to industrial components. Miss Mills possessed all 3. Circumstantial, Mills said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Inspector Slack produced a new piece of evidence. We found this in your workshop, Miss Mills. It's a circuit diagram showing exactly how to modify a metal pole into an electrocution device. Your handwriting, according to our experts. The room fell silent. Mills stared at the diagram, her face pale. I design many circuits. Theoretical exercises. It doesn't mean... It matches the modification exactly, Slack interrupted. Every component, every connection. This isn't theoretical. It's a blueprint for murder. Mills sank into a chair, her defiance finally crumbling. You don't understand what he did to me. 3 years in prison while he took everything. My business, my reputation, my freedom. 3 years of planning how to make him pay. Miss Marple watched sadly as Dorothy Mills began her confession, knowing that revenge, no matter how justified it might seem, had only created more tragedy in St. Mary Mead's darkest Christmas season. Chapter 6. The Workshop Secrets. Dorothy Mills's confession began slowly, her voice hollow with exhaustion and relief. Inspector Slack had formally cautioned her, but she seemed almost eager to unburden herself of the secret she'd carried. Prison gives you time to think, she began. 3 years to replay every moment, every betrayal. Webb structured our partnership so I'd be the sole signatory on the fraudulent transactions. He kept his hands clean while pushing me to make the illegal transfers. When investigators came, all the evidence pointed to me. Miss Marple listened intently, noting how Mills's hands remained steady despite her emotional state. The hands of an engineer, trained to be precise even under pressure. I studied electrical engineering by correspondence during my sentence, Mills continued. The prison encouraged it. Rehabilitation, they called it. But for me, it was preparation. I knew Webb's patterns, his weaknesses. His superstitious attachment to 47 was my opportunity. She explained how she'd volunteered for the parade specifically to get close to Webb without suspicion. Thomas Reed, feeling charitable toward a woman rebuilding her life, had welcomed her assistance with the electrical coordination. I built the device over 6 months, Mills said, acquiring components slowly, nothing traceable. The battery pack came from a demolished warehouse, one of Webb's old properties, ironically. The voltage multiplier I built from scratch using knowledge from my courses. "When did you modify the pole?" Inspector Slack asked. "2 nights before the parade. I volunteered to do final safety checks on the lanterns. Reed gave me the storage room key. I had hours alone with them. I selected pole 47, hollowed it out using precision tools, installed the device, then sealed it so perfectly that visual inspection would reveal nothing." Catherine Hayes interrupted. "But how did you know Webb would even attend the parade?" Mills smiled bitterly. Webb never missed a chance to display his community spirit. Every public event, there he was, playing the generous benefactor. I knew he'd come, and I knew he'd demand lantern 47. "The marking on the pole," Miss Marple said. "The tiny notch. You made that so Webb could find it?" "Yes. Subtle enough that only someone searching for that specific number would notice it. I arranged the lanterns numerically on the racks, 47 in a predictable position. When Webb started searching, I even pointed him in the right direction, knowing he'd never accept help, would insist on finding it himself." The confession revealed the depth of Mills's planning. She'd tested the device on laboratory equipment, calculating the exact voltage needed for instant lethality. She'd studied human electrical resistance, grip strength, the natural way people hold poles while walking. Every variable had been accounted for. "I watched him die," Mills said quietly. "Stood 20 feet away as he gripped that pole with both hands, completing the circuit I'd designed. 1,000 volts through his heart. He was dead before he hit the ground." Harold Price looked sick. "All those safety inspections I did, and I never suspected." "You couldn't have," Mills assured him. "I made sure of that. The modification was internal, invisible. You'd have needed to disassemble the pole to find it." Thomas Reed spoke for the first time, his voice heavy with guilt. "I gave you access, trusted you with the electrical systems." "Don't blame yourself," Mills replied. "I would have found another way. Webb had to pay for what he did." Miss Marple asked gently, "Did you consider the other participants? The danger to innocent people?" Mills's composure cracked. The device only worked with that specific pole, only when gripped in that specific way. I tested it hundreds of times. No one else was ever in danger. "But you turned a celebration into an execution," Miss Marple said sadly. "Children watched their parents carrying those lanterns, believing in the beauty of the tradition. Now that memory is forever tainted." Mills had no answer to this. The weight of her actions beyond Webb's death seemed to strike her for the first time. Inspector Slack gathered the signed confession and evidence. As Mills was led away, she turned to Miss Marple. "He destroyed so many lives. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts," Miss Marple replied quietly, "but it doesn't balance the scales. Violence never does." Chapter 7. The Lucky Numbers Curse. The investigation continued despite Mills's confession. Inspector Slack needed to verify every detail, and Miss Marple found herself drawn to understanding the deeper pattern of events that had led to murder. She visited Webb's widow, a nervous woman who seemed more relieved than grieved by her husband's death. "He was obsessed with that number," Mrs. Webb said, serving tea with shaking hands. 47 everything. Our wedding anniversary had to be celebrated on the 4th of July. 4th month, 7th day. He made business deals based on whether they involved 47 somehow. "It must have been exhausting," Miss Marple sympathized. "You have no idea. He once fired a secretary because she was 46 years old, said she'd bring bad luck until her birthday. The poor woman needed that job desperately, but Marcus didn't care." Miss Marple made note of this cruelty. Webb's superstition hadn't been harmless eccentricity, but another weapon in his arsenal of control. She next visited Thomas Reed, who was closing his parade organization office, declaring the tradition permanently ended. "I can't continue it," he said, packing decorations into boxes. "Every time I see a lantern, I think of Webb's death." "You couldn't have known," Miss Marple assured him, "but I should have been more careful about who I gave access to. Mills seemed so eager to help to rebuild her life. I thought I was doing something good." "You were," Miss Marple said firmly. "Her choices were her own." Reed revealed more about Webb's destruction of his business. "He bribed my biggest client to break their contract with me. Then, when I couldn't meet my loan payments, he bought my company's assets for pennies on the pound. He didn't even need them. Sold everything off within a year. He just wanted to prove he could destroy me. The pattern of Webb's cruelty became clearer with each conversation. Harold Price described 25 years of loyal service rewarded with manufactured safety violations. He needed to cut costs, so he created reasons to fire senior employees without severance. I wasn't the only one. Dozen of us, all close to retirement, all left with nothing. Sarah Fletcher had returned to her duties as parade marshal for other village events, but the shadow of her father's suicide remained. Webb didn't just destroy businesses, she told. Miss Marple. He destroyed families, futures, hope itself. Even Catherine Hayes, whose broken engagement might seem trivial compared to others' losses, had suffered deeply. Webb told his son I was a gold digger, showed him fabricated evidence of me researching the family wealth. It was all lies, but James believed his father. 3 years later, Webb arranged his marriage to an actual heiress. It was never about protecting James. It was about control. Miss Marple compiled these stories, seeing how Webb had created a network of pain throughout St. Mary Mead and beyond. Dorothy Mills hadn't been an isolated victim, but one of many, though she alone had transformed her suffering into lethal action. The police investigation uncovered Mills's full preparation. She'd purchased electrical components under false names, studied electrocution cases to understand necessary voltages, even tested her device on animal carcasses to ensure its effectiveness. The premeditation was absolute, yet Miss Marple found herself thinking about the number 47 itself. Webb's lucky number had become his doom, the very superstition he'd trusted, leading him to select his own death. There was a terrible poetry in it, a man whose faith in a number had been stronger than his compassion for people. She discovered that Webb had been planning new cruelties. Documents in his office revealed plans to develop the land where Fletcher's family lived, forcing them from the home they'd struggled to keep after her father's death. He'd been investigating Harold Price's new job, preparing to sabotage it with false references. Even in death, Webb's malevolence echoed through the village. Perhaps, Miss Marple reflected to Inspector Slack, the number 47 was never lucky at all. It was simply a random meaning Webb assigned to his first success, then used to justify every subsequent cruelty. Superstition as a weapon, Slack mused, using his own irrationality against him. Mills understood him perfectly. The tragedy, Miss Marple thought, was that understanding had been used for destruction rather than healing. Chapter 8. Circuits of Revenge. The trial preparations began immediately after Christmas, the festive season muted in St. Mary Mead by the shadow of recent events. Miss Marple found herself frequently consulted by both prosecution and defence, her insights considered valuable for understanding the complex web of relationships involved. Dorothy Mills had been transferred to London to await trial, but her detailed confession left little doubt about the outcome. Her lawyer, a young woman named Patricia Sterling, visited Miss Marple seeking context about the village dynamics. "My client doesn't deny her actions," Sterling explained, "but I need to understand the full scope of Webb's crimes against her and others. The jury needs to see what drove an educated, intelligent woman to such extremes." Miss Marple provided what information she could while maintaining her characteristic discretion. "Webb was systematic in his cruelty," she said. "He didn't simply harm people, he ensured they couldn't recover." The lawyer revealed that Mills had kept detailed journals during her prison sentence, documenting her growing obsession with revenge. She wrote electrical diagrams in the margins, refined the circuit design over months. It's compelling evidence of premeditation, but also of deteriorating mental state. "Grief and anger can corrupt even the finest minds," Miss Marple observed. Miss Mills was a successful businesswoman before Webb destroyed her. Prison transformed her from entrepreneur to engineer of revenge. Inspector Slack had discovered more evidence in Mills' apartment. Receipts for components purchased over 6 months, library records showing she'd studied electrocution methods, even practice poles she'd modified and tested. The preparation had been meticulous. She could have built a new life with those skills, Slack said during one of his visits to Miss Marple. The electrical expertise she developed, she could have started over legitimately. "But she couldn't see past her anger," Miss Marple replied. Revenge became her only future. The investigation revealed that Mills had considered other methods. Her journals contained plans for poisoning, arranged accidents, even hiring someone else to kill Webb. But she'd settled on electrocution for its poetic justice. Webb had sent her to prison where she'd learned the skills that would kill him. Catherine Hayes published a photo essay about the parade's history, ending with the tragic final procession. Her images showed the beauty of the tradition before focusing on the aftermath. Abandoned lanterns on wet cobblestones, police tape across the village square, Webb's widow standing alone at the funeral. "I struggle with sympathy for him," Hayes admitted to Miss Marple. "He destroyed so many lives, including mine. Yet seeing his death, the public spectacle of it, nobody deserves that." Thomas Reed had attempted suicide, saved only by his neighbour's intervention. The guilt of enabling Mills's access to the parade consumed him. Miss Marple visited him in hospital, offering what comfort she could. "You gave someone a second chance," she told him. "That's never wrong, even when it's exploited." "But I should have supervised more closely," Reed said. "Should have questioned why she was so eager to handle electrical coordination." "Hindsight provides clarity that the present never offers," Miss Marple replied gently. Sarah Fletcher threw herself into her work, organising village events with renewed determination to restore normalcy. Yet she confided to Miss Marple that she felt guilty relief at Webb's death. "He was planning to evict us," she revealed. "I found out after he died. We'd have lost everything Father left us. I didn't kill him, but I'm glad someone did. Does that make me terrible?" "It makes you human," Miss Marple assured her. "Feeling relief at the end of a threat is natural. You didn't act on those feelings. That's what matters." Harold Price struggled with different guilt. During the investigation, he'd admitted to seeing Mills near the storage room the night she modified the pole, but hadn't reported it, assuming she was doing legitimate work. "If I'd questioned her, investigated, Webb might be alive," he told Miss Marple. "Or Mills might have found another method," Miss Marple countered. "Determination like hers doesn't abandon its goal for one setback." As the trial date approached, St Mary Mead remained divided. Some felt Mills had delivered justice where the legal system had failed. Others saw her as a murderer who'd corrupted a beloved tradition. Miss Marple understood both perspectives, but maintained that murder, whatever its motivation, destroyed the killer as much as the victim. Chapter 9. The Unravelling Truth. The trial began in February, London's Central Criminal Court, packed with observers from St Mary Mead and beyond. The grand Victorian building seemed to absorb the collective anxiety of the village, its Gothic corridors echoing with whispered speculation about Dorothy Mills's fate. Miss Marple arrived early, her best navy coat pressed for the occasion, taking her seat in the public gallery, where she could observe both the dock and the jury box. Dorothy Mills stood with composed dignity, wearing a simple grey dress that made her appear more like a schoolteacher than an accused murderer. Her confession had removed any possibility of acquittal, but her lawyer, Patricia Sterling, argued passionately for understanding of diminished responsibility. The young barrister had built her case on the systematic destruction of Mills's life, painting her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a woman driven beyond the boundaries of rational thought. Miss Marple's testimony came on the second day. Under examination, she carefully detailed her observations without editorializing, though the prosecutor, a sharp-featured man named Pemberton, pressed her for opinions. "Miss Marple, in your extensive experience with criminal matters, was this murder preventable?" "All murders are theoretically preventable," she replied carefully, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "But preventing them requires recognizing the danger before it manifests." Miss Mills concealed her intentions with remarkable skill. She appeared to be a woman rebuilding her life, not planning to end another's. The technical evidence presentation transformed the courtroom into a grim classroom. The prosecution demonstrated the modified pole, explaining the electrical circuit with diagrams projected onto screens. The lead technical expert, Dr. Harrison, spoke with clinical precision about the sophistication of the weapon. This device required advanced knowledge of electrical engineering, he testified. The voltage multiplication circuit alone involves calculations beyond amateur understanding. The builder understood not just electricity but human physiology. how much current stops a heart, how the body's resistance changes with grip strength, the precise path electricity takes through tissue. The jury looked horrified as Dr. Harrison demonstrated with a mannequin how Webb would have gripped the pole, how the circuit completed through his body, how death would have been instantaneous yet agonizing. Several jury members visibly flinched when he described the internal burning that occurred along the current's path. Mills took the stand on day 3 against Sterling's strong advice. She spoke with unexpected eloquence about Webb's systematic destruction of her life. "He didn't just take my business," she said, her voice steady but underlaid with years of suppressed rage. "He architected my destruction with the same precision I later used to architect his. Every fraudulent transaction was designed to implicate me alone. He kept recordings of our conversations but edited them, removing his instructions, keeping only my compliance." She described prison in vivid detail, the first night in a cell, the realization that her life as she'd known it was over, the slow dawning that Webb had orchestrated everything. "I had 3 years to understand how thoroughly he'd planned my downfall. 3 years to realize the law that convicted me would never convict him. 3 years to decide that if justice wouldn't come from courts, I would deliver it myself." The prosecutor challenged her justification relentlessly. "So, you appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner?" "I became what he made me," Mills replied, her composure finally cracking. "He turned me into a criminal with his fraud scheme. Prison completed the transformation. I went in as Dorothy Mills, businesswoman. I came out as Dorothy Mills, electrical engineer with nothing to lose." The parade of character witnesses for the victim proved devastating, not for the defense but for Webb's memory. Former employee after employee described systematic cruelty. Harold Price's testimony about his lost retirement moved several jury members to tears. Sarah Fletcher's account of finding her father's body after Webb's false testimony drove him to suicide left the courtroom in stunned silence. Thomas Reed, who'd attempted suicide from guilt over enabling Mills's access, testified via video link from a psychiatric facility. His broken voice describing how Webb had destroyed his business purely for sport, not even keeping the assets, but selling them immediately, illustrated Webb's pathological need to harm others. Even Webb's own son James testified for the defense. "My father was a monster," he said simply. "He destroyed my engagement to Catherine because he could, then arranged my marriage to someone else like I was a business merger. I don't condone what Ms. Mills did, but I understand it." The psychiatric evaluation presented on day 4 showed Mills had developed what Dr. Margaret Forsyth called a fixated, delusional system centered on achieving justice through revenge. The psychiatrist explained how isolation, injustice, and intelligence had combined to create a perfect storm in Mills's psyche. "She didn't snap," Dr. Forsyth testified. "She slowly, methodically transformed her entire identity around the goal of killing Marcus Webb. Her electrical engineering studies weren't primarily about rehabilitation. They were about acquiring the skills for murder. Every circuit she studied, every equation she solved, brought her closer to her goal. In her mind, she wasn't learning a trade, she was learning an execution method." The defense presented evidence of Webb's continued predations. Documents showed he'd been planning to evict the Fletcher family, destroy Harold Price's new employment, and acquire several more small businesses through his typical tactics of destruction. Marcus Webb was an ongoing threat to the community, Sterling argued. Dorothy Mills didn't just kill a man, she stopped a serial destroyer of lives. Miss Marple found this argument troubling despite its factual accuracy. During a recess, she spoke with Inspector Slack about her concerns. "If we accept that suffering justifies murder, where does it end? Half the village had reason to want Webb dead." "But only Mills acted on it," Slack pointed out. "Only Mills had the specific combination of expertise, access, and broken psychology to act," Miss Marple corrected. "Others might have, given the same circumstances." The trial's most dramatic moment came when the prosecution presented Mills's journals from prison. Page after page showed electrical diagrams evolving from simple circuits to the complex weapon that killed Webb. The margins contained calculations of electrical resistance, voltage requirements, and most chillingly practice signatures of Dorothy Mills, electrical engineer, repeated hundreds of times. One entry, dated 2 years into her sentence, read, I understand now that justice is just a word we use to comfort victims. Real justice must be taken, not granted. Webb taught me that when he took everything from me while the law watched. I'm learning to speak his language, the language of taking what you want regardless of rules. The jury deliberated for 2 full days. When they returned, the forewoman, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Pembridge, read the verdict with obvious reluctance. Guilty of murder, with the strongest possible recommendation for mercy based on extraordinary circumstances. The judge, Lord Justice Harcourt, delivered a sentencing speech that would be quoted in legal texts for years. The law cannot condone vigilante justice, no matter how justified it might seem. Dorothy Mills was grievously wronged by Marcus Webb, but she chose to answer injustice with murder. While this court recognises the extraordinary provocations she endured, we must maintain that suffering does not grant licence to kill. I sentenced Dorothy Mills to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As Mills was led away, she stopped beside Miss Marple. You understand, don't you, why I had to do it? He would never have stopped, never have faced justice. I ended him the way he ended me, completely, deliberately, with planning he never saw coming. I understand why you felt you had to, Miss Marple replied sadly, touching Mills's handcuffed hands gently. But feeling and having to are different things. You had choices, even after all you'd suffered. You chose to become him rather than overcome him. Mills's expression crumbled. I became him. Oh God, I became exactly what I hated. The realization seemed to break something in Mills, that her arrest and trial hadn't touched. She was led away sobbing, finally understanding that in killing Webb, she'd completed the destruction he'd begun. Chapter 10, After the Light Fades. Spring came slowly to St. Mary Mead that year, as if nature itself was reluctant to bring renewal after such darkness. The village struggled with the aftermath of the trial, divided between those who saw Mills as a victim driven to extremity, and those who saw her as a murderer who'd corrupted their most cherished tradition. Miss Marple tended her garden with special care, finding solace in growth after witnessing so much destruction. The roses she planted that spring were white, symbols of new beginnings and remembrance for all those destroyed by the cycle of violence. The village had changed in fundamental ways. The parade ground remained empty, grass growing through cobblestones where lanterns had once cast their cheerful glow. Children who'd carried lanterns in previous years now avoided the square, their parents unable to explain how something so beautiful had become deadly. The local school cancelled its lantern-making classes, teachers finding the association too disturbing to continue. Thomas Reed had left St. Mary Mead entirely after his suicide attempt, relocating to Scotland, where no one knew his connection to the tragedy. His departure felt like another victory for Webb, whose malevolence continued rippling outward even after death. The parade organisation disbanded, its remaining funds donated to victim support charities. The storage room where Mills had modified the fatal pole was sealed, then eventually demolished, as if destroying the physical space could erase the memory. Sarah Fletcher emerged as an unexpected leader in the village's recovery. Rather than fleeing her painful associations, she channeled her energy into creating new traditions. We can't let one tragedy define us, she told the village council during a heated meeting about cancelling all public celebrations. My father wouldn't want Webb's shadow to darken St. Mary Mead forever. We're more than one terrible night. She established the Marcus Webb Memorial Fund, named not to honour him, but to acknowledge that even cruel men shouldn't die by violence. The fund helped victims of corporate crime, providing legal assistance, counselling and financial support. Harold Price became its first beneficiary, using the support to retrain and find new employment. Within 6 months, the fund had helped a dozen families Webb had destroyed. Catherine Hayes published her book, The Lucky Number, a study in systematic cruelty, which became an unexpected bestseller. She donated her profits to the Memorial Fund, but struggled with the attention the book brought. People want me to either condemn or condone Mills, she told Miss Marple during tea. They can't accept that both Webb and Mills were wrong, that victim and perpetrator aren't always distinct categories. Her book documented patterns of corporate abuse that should have triggered legal intervention but never did. She interviewed 73 of Webb's victims, finding similar patterns of destruction, first financial manipulation, then legal maneuvering, finally personal humiliation. Webb hadn't just beaten competitors, he'd ensured they could never recover. Miss Marple began corresponding with Mills in prison, their letters carefully worded but genuinely sympathetic. Mills's early letters were defiant, justifying her actions with lists of Webb's crimes, but gradually the tone changed. "I dream about that night," Mills wrote 6 months into her sentence. "Not about killing Webb, I still feel no remorse for that. But I dream about the children watching the parade, their faces when the lights went out, when their parents started screaming. I took something from them that Webb never could have, their innocence about beauty and safety. That haunts me more than his death ever will." Mills had begun teaching electrical engineering to other inmates, finding unexpected purpose in education. "I'm good at teaching," she wrote. "Patient, thorough. I could have done this instead of killing. I could have rebuilt my life through building others up instead of tearing Webb down, but rage made me blind to any future except revenge." Inspector Slack visited Miss Marple regularly, their conversations turning philosophical as they processed the case's implications. "How do we identify the Dorothy Mills before they become killers?" he asked during one visit. "By addressing the Marcus Webbs before they create them," Miss Marple replied, pouring tea with steady hands despite her advancing age. "Mills was made, not born. Years of injustice transformed her from entrepreneur to murderer. If someone had stopped Webb after his first destruction, Mills might be running a successful business today instead of serving life for murder." The vacant storage building that had housed the lanterns was purchased by an anonymous buyer, James Webb, using his inheritance to create something positive from his father's death. It became a community centre offering free legal clinics, financial counselling, and mental health support. The building that had housed implements of death now hosted children's programs and senior activities, life replacing death's shadow. Yet reminders persisted throughout the village. The electrical supply shop that had unknowingly provided Mills's components closed, its owner unable to bear the association. A small plaque appeared at the spot where Webb died, reading simply, "Violence ends nothing. It only transforms pain from one person to another." Harold Price, recovered and employed again, became an unexpected advocate for corporate reform. He spoke at business schools about ethical leadership, using Webb as a cautionary tale. "Webb died rich but unmourned," Price would conclude his talks. "His wealth couldn't prevent his murder or bring anyone to genuinely grieve him. He won every battle but lost the human war. What profit is that?" The first Christmas after the trial passed with subdued acknowledgement. No lanterns lit the streets, no parade wound through the village. Instead, families gathered privately, finding comfort in simplicity after complexity had brought such pain. Some villagers attempted to organise alternative celebrations, but nothing gained traction. The wound was too fresh, the association too strong. On the first anniversary of Webb's death, Miss Marple walked the parade route alone at dusk, the same time the procession would have begun. She imagined the river of light that had once flowed there, 200 points of brightness moving in harmony. At the spot where Webb had fallen, someone had left a single battery-powered lantern, not in memorial but in defiance, showing that light could persist even where darkness had struck. She noticed she wasn't alone in her pilgrimage. Sarah Fletcher stood nearby with her mother, both silent. Harold Price sat on a bench feeding pigeons. Catherine Hayes photographed the empty square, documenting absence rather than presence. Even James Webb was there, standing in shadows, mourning not his father, but what his father might have been if cruelty hadn't consumed him. "He chose his death, you know," James said to Miss Marple. "Not suicide, but he chose to be the kind of man someone would want to kill. Every cruel act was a step toward that pole." Miss Marple reflected on the number 47, Webb's lucky number that had become his doom. Perhaps there was no luck, only choices and consequences, patterns we impose on chaos to find meaning. Webb had chosen cruelty, Mills had chosen revenge, and both had been destroyed by their choices. The number hadn't been lucky or unlucky, it had simply been a number onto which Webb projected meaning, then trusted with fatal certainty. By the second anniversary, changes were visible. New residents had arrived who knew nothing of the electric death. Children had been born who would never know the parade. The community centre thrived, its programs expanding. The Memorial Fund had helped dozens of families. Sarah Fletcher had been elected to the village council. Her campaign focused on renewal rather than revenge. Dorothy Mills wrote less frequently now, her letters showing acceptance rather than justification. "I've been thinking about electricity," she wrote in what would be her final letter to Miss Marple. "It follows the path of least resistance, like I did. I took the easiest path to ending my pain, through ending Webb. But electricity can also create light, power healing machines, connect people across distances. I chose to be lightning when I could have been illumination." She'd started a correspondence course for inmates wanting to learn trades, using her engineering knowledge constructively. "I can't undo Webb's death," she wrote, "but I can try to prevent others from following my path. When they release me, if they release me, I'll have something to offer besides revenge." Miss Marple kept all the letters, filing them carefully with her other correspondence from cases. Each represented a life transformed by violence, either as perpetrator or victim. The Christmas lantern case, as it came to be known, stood out for its technical sophistication, but even more for its tragic completeness, how thoroughly Webb and Mills had destroyed each other. The village slowly healed, as villages do, through small acts of kindness and the passage of time. The parade ground was eventually transformed into a memorial garden, planted with lights that bloomed rather than bulbs that burned. Each plant represented one of Webb's victims, including Mills herself, acknowledging that she too had been destroyed by his cruelty, even as she destroyed him in return. Miss Marple, knitting by her window in the evenings, reflected that the most complex patterns were often the most fragile. One wrong stitch, one thread pulled too tight, and everything unravelled. The Christmas lantern parade had been St. Mary Mead's pattern of joy, broken by one electrified pole, one woman's revenge, one man's cruelty spanning decades. Yet from broken patterns new ones could emerge. The village was weaving something different now, quieter perhaps, more careful, but genuine. The river of light had ended, but other illuminations were beginning. The memorial garden bloomed, the community centre thrived, former victims found new purposes. Even Mills in prison was creating rather than destroying. On the 3rd anniversary, someone organised a small gathering at dusk, not a parade but a vigil, each person holding a candle for someone lost to violence, Webb included. The lights didn't move through the streets but stood still, creating points of remembrance rather than rivers of celebration. It wasn't the same as the old tradition, couldn't be, but it was something. Miss Marple attended, her candle steady in arthritic hands. She thought of Dorothy Mills in her cell, perhaps looking at the same stars. She thought of Webb, whose cruelty had authored his own ending. She thought of all the victims, Webb's and Mills's both, trying to rebuild lives from wreckage. As the candles were extinguished one by one, Miss Marple made her way home through streets that would never again host lantern parades. The tradition was gone, killed as surely as Webb himself, but traditions like people could be mourned and then replaced. St. Mary Mead would find new ways to celebrate, new lights to carry through darkness. The case file would read simply, "Murder by electrocution. Perpetrator convicted. Justice served." But Miss Marple knew better. Justice hadn't been served. It had been perverted by both Webb and Mills, twisted into shapes that destroyed rather than restored. True justice would have been Webb facing legal consequences for his crimes, Mills rebuilding her life legitimately, the village keeping its innocence about beautiful traditions. Instead, they had this: a murdered man, an imprisoned woman, a traumatized village, and the knowledge that even the safest adaptations, LED lights instead of candles, could be corrupted by human malevolence. The Christmas lantern parade had been meant to bring light. In the end, it had brought only darkness, proving that evil could corrupt any tradition, no matter how innocent, when expertise met rage and found opportunity. Yet still, candles were lit. Still, people gathered. Still, light persisted, because that too was human nature, to create brightness even where darkness had triumphed, to begin again even when beginning seemed impossible, to carry whatever light remained through whatever darkness endured. William here again from Mindful Musings. Thank you for joining me through this chilling tale from St. Mary Mead, where Christmas lights became harbingers of death, and the number 47 proved unlucky indeed. Remember, even in our brightest celebrations, shadows can lurk, and sometimes the most sophisticated murders are driven by the simplest of motives, revenge. Until next time, stay curious, stay watchful, and remember, not all lights are meant to guide us safely home.